Hello and welcome to Encouraging Others and Loving Jesus. I'm your host, Kim Smith. This is episode 382, Turning Points in History. I don't know about you. I have never been a big history buff. It's not that I don't appreciate history. It's just I haven't sat still long enough to really focus on. I am blessed to live in New Orleans, just outside of New Orleans, and we have the World War II Museum. And I'm going to visit there again here in a couple of weeks. Haven't been there in quite some time. Have enjoyed my times that I have gone. The first time I went with a real history buff, and he was stopping and listening and taking it all in, and I appreciated that. It just wasn't where I was at that time. And then I'm not sure how many times I've been, but I know that the last time I had been until this one coming up, I went with a mentor of mine, and we went and watched the film that was put together by Tom Hanks. It's one of those immersive type of experiences where the seats rock and you're in the action, so to speak. And I very much appreciate that. It was a really good day, and I really took that in. And there's certain displays that just grab me. There's one when you first walk in that shows just how few American troops there were versus the Japanese and versus the Germans. They have this incredible display, and I've taken pictures of it probably every time I've been in there. And it just really helps you to see what World War II, how incredible it is that it ended the way that it did. And then fast forward to about 3 or so weeks ago, I was recovering from a major surgery. And so I had some extra time to not get up, to lay down on my bed and really take in some things that were on television. And right at that time, the History Channel started a TV series, a multi-episode called World War II that was narrated by Tom Hanks. And I've watched all the episodes. I've really watched most of them more than one time. And it's really gotten me to an interesting place where I really want to understand more. As I've watched the episodes and looking at how different battles came about and the strategy that went in behind them, and how that some days it did not turn out the way that the Allies anticipated by any way, shape, or form. And I really, when I go to the World War II Museum this time, I'm going to see things from a totally different perspective. I'm going to really go and dig in and try to understand this more. Because as we know, World War II was a turning point in world history. And then yesterday I went to watch a new movie that came out just yesterday. So I'm recording this on July 4th of 2026, the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. And yesterday a movie came out called Young Washington. And I have no doubt that I'm really going to probably drop a little bit from that film here as well. And if you look down below, I've got the link in the show notes to the trailer for that movie, so that no matter when you're listening to this, you can find it. I'm also going to drop the link, I didn't earlier, to the series World War II, because it's really worth spending some time. No matter how much you may feel as though you know, I have a feeling you're going to learn something new. But in the midst of that, there was a trailer for a new movie that comes out in August of this year, and it's called The Brink of War. And it centers around what happened in the mid-1980s with a particular, with the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. And it's called The Brink of War, and there's a statement by one of the people that you see in the trailer. And the fella talks about the fact that this right here, the decisions made at this particular event are going to shape history. And I very much look forward to seeing that movie as well. Again, me wanting to understand more about this particular turning point in history that I didn't even realize was a turning point in history. Somehow or another, because I would have been a freshman in college at the time, the only turning point that I know in history that happened in that year was the crash of the space shuttle. That's what I remember. I did not know that the world was about to go into World War III, if certain decisions were not made at that time. And I say all of that to say that today we are finishing up our Divided Kingdom series. We've been doing this now for at least a couple of years. You know, we talked about King Saul, the first king of Israel. We talked about King David for probably a year and a half, I would think at least. We talked about Solomon. That didn't take too long. And then the kingdom divided. And we went down the northern section, and the northern section was one bad decision after another. It was just like, who's going to do more evil in the sight of the Lord? It was awful. And then you have the southern kingdom that's a lots of ups and downs. But over the last 4 kings in particular, it was just bad. We saw that last week. Last week we talked about defining moment versus what Zedekiah, the last king of the southern kingdom, instead of it being his defining moment, he just stayed in defiance. He wasn't worried about what God said. The only reason he wanted the prophet Jeremiah to weigh in on any of it was because he wanted to see if God would give him the inside scoop. He had no want whatsoever to cry out to the Lord. And I encourage you to go back and listen to that if you didn't listen to it. This week, we are finally talking about the fall of Jerusalem. Now, it didn't happen overnight. It was not something that happened like the Battle of Jericho, where the walls came tumbling down and everything happened overnight. It didn't. It happened in phases with the captivity. But when it came to the fall of Jerusalem, it's incredibly sad. And the reason it's incredibly sad was God gave them so many opportunities. Over and over and over and over and over again, he gave them opportunities for them to turn their lives around, to have their own personal turning points in history that could have led to a turning point in the history of the Jewish nation, a turning point where they all turned to the Lord and they remained there. We've seen that through multiple different good kings, such as Josiah, such as Hezekiah. We saw the people turn to the Lord. But sadly, as soon as that leader was either no longer focusing on God himself, or he was gone, the people again turned to their wicked ways, and it just got ugly. And now we see the final straw. And so I decided to read the passage from 2 Kings 25, 1 through 21, which gives you like a broader overview and gives you a few more facts. But our focal passage is going to be kind of the Cliff Notes version that is contained in 2 Chronicles 36, 17 through 21. And I want you to think about this. Obviously, this was a turning point for the Jewish nation. The northern kingdom had already been taken into Assyrian captivity, and now the southern kingdom, the majority of them are being taken away into Babylonian captivity. There's only a small amount of people that are going to remain there to, like tend the vineyards, to do those type of tasks. But this is really the end. And it causes me to just stop and causes me to think about one other turning point that I saw many years ago. I had come to New Orleans, and when I came to New Orleans, I did not have a job, and so I was really seeking the Lord's will as to what direction to do. And I did a job for the first 5 months that I was down here that I'd never done before. And I went back to Kentucky for a very short break around the holidays. And I came back, and the door to the building where I worked, my key didn't work anymore. And so I'm calling my boss at the time, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm here to work. And she's like, well, we're closing. And for the next few days, we as a staff made multiple phone calls to people, just letting them know that we were no longer going to be in business, and just trying to make those final calls and those final connections, and trying to help people get what they needed as that business was shutting down. I'll never forget that. Even though that was 20 something years ago, that was just an incredible time. It was whiplash kind of time. And so as we see today, when it comes to the fall of Jerusalem, like with my job, with that business, for somebody there'd been buildup. That didn't happen overnight, but for me it happened overnight. Like literally did not know anything was happening, and all of a sudden I'm making phone calls to say this business is closing. Versus those that were in the power positions who knew before that day that, hey, things are not working out and we're gonna give this up. But we've known when it comes to the southern kingdom, like God has not cloaked this by any stretch of the imagination. God has repeatedly, even if you just look at the words of Jeremiah, which he was not the only prophet saying this, but if you just look at the words of Jeremiah through multiple different reigns, because he himself, he spoke on the Lord's behalf for almost 50 years of his life. He was a faithful, not perfect, but a faithful mouthpiece. And his story, like what he was telling, even though God may have had him tell it in a little bit of different ways, like he had some object lessons that he gave, dirty underwear, all sorts of fun stuff that he got to deal with. But the message was always the same. Guys, like, turn to the Lord. Like, this is not going to work out well for you. You're sinning. Turn to the Lord. And yet, they do not believe that it's really going to happen. And I shared a few weeks ago, and I'm intentionally sharing that right now before I read this, because for me, it may be the most impactful part. If you remember, as I was talking a few weeks ago about the people And the fact that, yes, they're being told you're sinning and you need to do the right thing. You need to come back to the Lord. You need to abandon your false gods. You need to. And there was a contingency of them that believed that there was no way that Jerusalem was going to fall. And why was it? It was because the temple was located there. The good luck charm was there. And therefore, God was not going to touch Jerusalem because the temple was there. And in that particular podcast, I talked to you about, like, what is it in your life that causes you to think that you somehow or another have there's something about you or something about your particular situation that you can just keep doing the wrong thing, and God's really not going to let the hammer come down on you because somehow or another you've got some sort of special protection. Well, it's not the case. And we're going to see today that specifically, not only was Jerusalem captured, but the temple was just obliterated. Okay, here we go. Let me click on the right tab there. 2 Kings 25, 1 through 21, and then we will do more of the Cliff Notes version. So on January 15th, now we read this last week, but in order to set it in context, it really is helpful to get this. So remember, Zedekiah was the last ruler of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin of the southern kingdom. And so we read over this last week. I'm going to read over it to set the stage. So on January 15th, during the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon led his entire army against Jerusalem. They surrounded the city and built siege ramps against its walls. Jerusalem was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah's reign. By July 18th, in the 11th year of Zedekiah's reign, the famine in the city had become very severe. The last of the food was entirely gone. Then a section of the city wall was broken down. Since the city was surrounded by the Babylonians, the soldiers waited for nightfall and escaped through the gate between the two walls behind the king's garden. Then they headed toward the Jordan Valley. But the Babylonian troops chased the king and overtook him on the plains of Jericho, for his men had all deserted him and scattered. They captured the king and took him to the king of Babylon at Riblah, where they pronounced judgment upon Zedekiah. They made Zedekiah watch as they slaughtered his sons. Then they gouged out Zedekiah's eyes, bound him in bronze chains, and led him away to Babylon. And here's where we pick up the part that we have not read up until now. On August 14th of that year, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuzaradan, I have a hard time with that one, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard and an official of the Babylonian king, arrived in Jerusalem. He burned down the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He destroyed all the important buildings in the city. Then he supervised the entire Babylonian army as they tore down the walls of Jerusalem on every side. Then King Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took as exiles the rest of the people who remained in the city, the defectors who had declared their allegiance to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the population. But the captain of the guard allowed some of the poorest people to stay behind to care for the vineyards and fields. The Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars in front of the Lord's temple, the bronze water carts, and the great bronze basin called the sea. And they carried all the bronze away to Babylon. They also took all the ash buckets, shovels, lamp snuffers, ladles, and all the other bronze articles used for making sacrifices at the temple. The captain of the guard also took the incense burners and basins and all the other articles made of pure gold and silver. The weight of the bronze from the two pillars, the sea, and the water carts was too great to be measured. These things had been made for the Lord's temple in the days of Solomon. Each of the pillars was 27 feet tall. The bronze capital on top of each pillar was 7.5 feet high and was decorated with a network of bronze pomegranates all the way around. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took with him as prisoners Sariah, the high priest, Zephaniah, the priest of the second rank, and 3 chief gatekeepers. And from among the people still hiding in the city, he took an officer who had been in charge of the Judean army, 5 of the king's personal advisors, the army commander's chief secretary who was in charge of recruitment, and 60 other citizens. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them all to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and there at Riblah in the land of Hamath, the king of Babylon had them all put to death. So the people of Judah were sent into exile from their land. It's a very, very, very bad day, as you can see. And so now we're going to read the Cliff Notes version of it. And then let's just take a few minutes to just reflect and think about our own turning points in our lives. So before I read this, I'm going to give you the weekly engagement feature. Identify the turning points of your life. Looking back on those times, how have they changed you? You think about the people that would have been around for the last days in Jerusalem, that would have gone in the first wave of the exile, that would have gone in the second wave of the exile, that it would have remained until literally Jerusalem is just decimated. And the temple itself, their good luck charm, what is not destroyed is taken away because the value of the articles was not in what they were created to accomplish, to help in the worship of the Lord. The value was in the gold and the silver of which they were made. And then you have those few people who remained, the poor people who were left behind to just try to keep things running. And if we were to do a man on the street interview, so to speak, give them a few years and have them look back and ask how those events changed them, it would be very interesting to hear. I would think that at least some of them would say, I never believed that God would allow that to happen. I never believed that Jeremiah guy. I never thought that it was really going to turn out that way. I thought for sure that God would He would just save us just because we're Israelites. He's just going to just save us. They learned about the character of God on that day. I'm sure they learned about the character of those around them. And then they learned a lot about themselves. And so here in the 2nd Chronicles version, here's our little Cliff Notes version of the fall of Jerusalem. So the Lord brought the king of Babylon against them. The Babylonians killed Judah's young men, even chasing after them into the temple. They had no pity on the people, killing both young men and young women, the old and the infirm. God handed all of them over to Nebuchadnezzar. The king took home to Babylon all the articles, large and small, used in the temple of God, and the treasures from both the Lord's temple and from the palace of the king and his officials. Then his army burned the temple of God, tore down the walls of Jerusalem, burned all the palaces, and completely destroyed everything of value. The few who survived were taken as exiles to Babylon, and they became servants to the king and his sons until the kingdom of Persia came to power. So the message of the Lord spoken through Jeremiah was fulfilled. The land finally enjoyed its Sabbath rest, lying desolate until the 70 years were fulfilled, just as the prophet had said. I like the Cliff Notes version. I'll be honest with you. One of the reasons I like it is because it refers to Jeremiah and the fact that what Jeremiah had been saying for his entire ministry. They're just letting people know what he said is exactly what God did. That he was not crying wolf, so to speak. That God sent him. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at Jeremiah. I've been looking at him in my Sunday school lesson for so long that I just have this. He's got to be one of the first people I go find in heaven. Like, got to be. I got to meet Jeremiah. But Jeremiah was commissioned as like a teenager. And God had placed his hand on him from before he was born. He had created him with purpose. And Jeremiah, there were some days where Jeremiah wasn't real sure about that purpose because it alienated him from even the people in his hometown. He wasn't popular because he's saying turn or burn. Like, he's got the same message that he just continues. But God has told him, if you are to speak for me, and I'm going to give you the words to say. And like, all you've got to focus on is just being obedient. Let me take care of them. Let me take care of all that. You just be obedient. One of the things yesterday about watching the movie Young Washington, and I will try as best I can not to need a spoiler alert. But in that movie, number one, the young actor that plays Young Washington, to me, is just phenomenal. That's first. But number two, as I was reading there and thinking about Jeremiah, one of the things about young Washington was he really felt as though, even on the worst of days, that he had a purpose in life. Like, he really did feel like he was there by a providential hand. I'm not sure how much he understood about God specifically, but he felt as though what he was doing was in the providence of God or a divine being. And Jeremiah definitely believed that. And as I was watching that and just watching, just like we were talking about here with this fall of Jerusalem being a very bad day, young George Washington had a really, really bad day. And it was a bad day that could have easily caused a weaker young man to just say, I give up. It is not worth it. Let me just go be just like every other young man. And like, it is not worth the price of leadership if I have to go through what I went through. But after he regroups, he comes back ready to serve. Ready. He knows he's got a lot to learn. He's looking back on that experience, he's had time to reflect and he's had time to see where he made the wrong choices. And he just wants to step in and help in any way. He wants to take the experience that he had and he wants to use it for the good. As the people of Jerusalem, as the people of the southern kingdom of Israel, as they looked back, as when they were hanging out in Babylonian captivity, and instead of having authority, having the opportunity to do the things that they had done, now they're under the rule and reign of Nebuchadnezzar and his mighty men, and like, this is not a cakewalk for them by any stretch of the imagination. They never believed that they would be in this predicament. But one of the things that I hope that at least a good portion of them came to realize was, I'm in this situation because of my own choices. Like, we as a people, but me as an individual, we made really bad choices, and God gave us opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to turn, and we just didn't. And here we are reaping the whirlwind, so to speak, because of the choices that we've made. The fact that God had mercy on us and allowed us to even live to be in captivity, like, we need to be thankful for that, and we need to grow where we are planted. We need to live for the benefit of those that are around us, not only our brothers and sisters, but also for the people of this land. We need to do what the Lord had called us to do from the beginning, and that was to make his name known to the nations. Now he sent us to the nations, and not in a way that any of us would have dreamed, despite the fact that he had told us through the prophet Jeremiah and through others that this was going to happen. We never thought it really would. It was never going to lead to our captivity. It was never. No. And yet, that's where they were. And whether they were in the first wave, the second wave, or the third wave, they hear just what a mess Jerusalem is. They hear that the temple has been destroyed, and what has not been destroyed has been pulled over into captivity as well, because they want the gold and they want the silver, not because they want to worship the Lord God, but because they want the money. And as the people looked back on this turning point in the history of the Jewish nation, what were the lessons that they learned? Well, I hope, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they learned who God is. That he is a holy and righteous God. And even though he had been so gracious to them and had given them so many chances, there is a limit. And he had been very vocal, especially through Jeremiah, to let them know the end is coming. You keep doing the same thing. You turn to me, and then you run back into the thick of all the little g gods. You just think that, like, if you come visit me and come hang out at church, so to speak, here and there, that you're good. But that's not the case. And again, I'm sure they learned things about themselves with any turning point in history, whether it's personal history or it is history of a nation. Like, you learn a lot about the people around you. You know, George Washington, as he was experiencing the battle and he was experiencing his second chance to really make a difference, he learned about others around him. He learned about others in leadership. He learned that one guy was definitely not all that he was portraying himself to be. He was not really the leader that he wanted people to think that he was. And George took the opportunity. And in the midst of tremendous obstacles, and in a place where he had to beg to even be there, he saw his opportunity to lead. Well, really not even to lead, but to just serve his fellow men, and especially those that he had led before. And his efforts changed the course of history, led to many personal turning points for people. But as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, what young Washington accomplished helped get us to the point where we are now. Would we have ever had July 4th of 1776 if it were not for the formation and the tenacity of young Washington and others? We don't know. But we are thankful as we look back on this 250. Or we look back on our own personal turning points of our history. What are the lessons to be learned? And some of the greatest lessons are not learned on the days where we can take the flag and put it on the tallest mountain and claim it. But it is in the valleys where we have the toughest of days that we can learn that God's still there, even in the valley. Right now there's a song out by Tasha Layton called Meet Me in the Valley. And like, God will meet us in the valleys. He'll be there on the mountaintops, but he'll be there in the valleys. So as you look back on your own turning points in history, how did they change you? Did you come out of them bitter or better? And as you experience more turning points, are you going to be looking for God's perspective in the midst? As we finish up this divided kingdom and get into more of the writings from some of the other prophets, some of those other directions, may we never ever miss the lessons of what happened to the people in the southern kingdom. That even though they were told again and again and again and again and again and again that the lives you are living are not pleasing to the Lord and you need to turn to him, they didn't. And they reaped those consequences. What is it today that the Lord is convicting you of? Is it a sin of commission, something you are doing wrong and you know you are doing it? Or is it a sin of omission where God is laying on your heart forgiveness you need to give? You need to be more intentional about studying his word and his word becoming a part of you. You need to be lifting up the nations. You need to be approaching him in prayer with boldness. You need to be sharing your faith with others, not just in your deeds, but in your words. What is it that the Lord is laying on your heart? And could today be a turning point in your history where you say enough is enough? Jerusalem may have fallen, but my life, I am going to take charge this very day, and I am going to say, Lord, from this point on, I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my precious Savior. I surrender all. And just see what the Lord can do. Thank you so much for tuning in. Cannot wait to see how this next, because we're at a turning point in this podcast, because we've been going through the divided kingdom for so long. And we're going to take a little detour here. And I look forward to seeing exactly what lessons the Lord is going to lay on my heart for me to lay on your hearts as we move forward. Just, hey, remember, it's always a trust and obey kind of day.